Hello and welcome to Branding for Success, where we discuss all things brand strategy, marketing, and design. I'm Rick Callahan, the founder and CEO of Creative.
And I'm Julia LaCursi, the brand strategist at Creative. Whether you're well-versed in branding or just getting started, we've got the roadmap for your brand success.
Welcome back to another episode of Branding for Success. We have a very special guest today.
We have two special guests, actually.
Right, I forgot about Connor.
Yes.
Sorry, Connor.
Hi, Connor.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we also have...
Bubba. You have anything to say? No.
Just a little lick, that's okay.
We do have Connor here today, who's our graphic designer on our team, because today's episode is going to be all about the intersection of strategy and design, so kind of walking you through the role of a graphic designer and a brand strategist and how we kind of work together on our different projects. At the end of this episode, we're going to do a little bit of a stylescape review to kind of show, in action, sort of how we apply certain strategies to design choices. So we'll be using, a real example that Connor designed and walk you through that process as well. But to get started, Rick, let's talk about, when clients come to us, they want a new logo, they want a new look for their brand. What do you usually say to them?
Why? And then I ask why again and again and again, because most of the time, clients who want to update or refine or evolve their logo or rebrand, they have a feeling or an inclination towards some sort of business problem they're trying to solve, but sometimes they might not know why the logo might help them or the branding. So I walk them through that process of really diving into what's this going to solve? How do we define success here? Why a logo?
Yeah, exactly. It's all about making very intentional design choices, and the only way to go about that is by having a very in-depth brand discovery phase before you even get into the design world.
Yeah, otherwise you end up getting clients without the strategy. They are doing it based on personal preference. They're asking for logos based on personal preference, and they're saying things like, what are they saying, Connor?
Yeah, Connor knows these issues all too well.
I mean, make it pop. Always, right?
Make it pop, right?
Make it pop.
That's the one. But what does that mean? What does that really mean? I don't know.
Yeah, they
Connor?
usually have very specific and never ending, as I'm sure Connor's very aware of, the back and forth that we often have there. We can see a clear distinction between the clients who understand the importance of strategy first, and then the ones who don't. It's all about the color choice and all that without kind of doing that work up front. Because usually the ones that don't really understand the strategy beforehand come back with 800 different edits. That's
right.
All based on personal preference, which Connor is very aware of.
And a lot of times those same folks who have the personal preference and no strategy, they'll say things like, I'll know it when I see it. Yeah. Kind of a red flag, I think, if you're a designer. So watch out for that one.
All right, so let's talk about that brand discovery phase then to start. So where do we kind of go? So a client comes to us with, they're looking for a new look for their brand, and we end up undergoing this entire branding project. So we always start with the brand discovery phase. So what does that look like, Rick?
Yeah, so we do what we call an interrogation. We ask them why, but we ask them a lot of questions to really dive into what does a new logo mean to them and their business or their organization, and how might this help their brand be more credible, and in what ways will that refined or new or altered logo help them come across a certain way. And that's where we start getting to the nuance of what they're really trying to go for, and where we try to dive into what is that strategy looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. We also use this time to really uncover all the nuances of their target markets, who we're actually trying to appeal to with this new brand. Also, how the brand positioning strategy, how we want the brand to be positioned in the market. So a lot of that evolves primarily from the brand's purpose, its essence, the way we want to, come off, how we can kind of compare your brand to others, in the market, so that we can create then the visual choices that align
right.
with that key kind of messaging that we want to be conveying.
Right. Yeah. Otherwise, we just go to Connor and go, hey, make a logo.
Yeah, so what would you do if we just came to you and was like, I don't know, make a logo for, give me an example of a brand.
A hot dog company.
Okay. A hot dog company.
Sorry.
What would you do?
But that's it. Like, that's all you get. Like, there's
Yeah.
no like colors. There's no there's no like target markets. There's no nothing. Right.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
make it.
And so you might come up with, some random like fast food looking one, and then we come to you and we're like, no, but it's a high
Premium.
end, gourmet hot
Gourmet
dog, like.
French.
It's like a $25 per hot dog type of thing. The logo should probably be a bit different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So that's just like, a
Yeah.
very simple example of as the more you learn about the brand. And
I do think. Sorry to interrupt, but
No,
I
you're
do
good.
think we should do a little test
Yeah.
for Connor. I think we should do that for a little mini podcast episode or an extra.
yeah, we should do that.
Where we just come in and we give them a random brief which has no information other than it's the company that does blah.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
then see what you come up with, and then we'll give you a second chance with strategy and the context that we're going to talk about in a minute, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, while we're on that, basically what we do then from the brand discovery phase is one thing I like to do is translate a lot of what I learn from the brand discovery phase into like some key words that sort of start to help guide the design phase. So if we're thinking like approachability, friendliness, fun, that lends itself to very different design choices than like confident, bold, edgy, it kind of boiling down a lot of those core values, kind of the descriptors you would use to describe the essence of the brand, and using that as a starting point to kind of gauge where we go with the design. Anything else that you would
I mean,
do
that-
to kind of help start transitioning to the
Inspiration.
design phase?
We'll
Yeah.
ask clients what they like and don't like as far as what they've seen out there. But equally as important of what they like or what they think might work is what they think won't work for their brand. Because a lot of times it'll tell us what their core values are.
Yeah.
If they're really strongly opposed to coming off a certain way, that tells us about how they want their logo to kind of come across the target markets.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so then from the designer perspective, where do you start? So, the strategist gives you all this information about the brand's target markets and their core values and how we want them to position in the market, some of those keywords that we kind of want to use. So where do you go? What do you start to think about?
Yeah, sure. So it's definitely important to just start and look at the whole report, look through all the target markets, everything, just sort of get an idea for who you're targeting and like why you're targeting these types of people and like what that means to the logo design process. Think like, there's like a drastic difference. Think like something like IBM, which is very corporate looking and very like straight edge and very like professional, for lack of a better term. And then compare it to something on the complete other end of the spectrum, like Build-A-Bear or something, where it's obviously directed towards children, so it's very like soft and playful. You couldn't, like, you have to know these things ahead of time. You have to know your audience before you can get into the design process, because if something that playful was directed towards someone who's building computers and managing businesses, it wouldn't really work the same.
Yeah.
So definitely start there and just kind of get an idea for who you're looking at. And I think that can help decide things like whether or not to use sharp edges or rounded forms, more natural forms, more like geometric shapes,
The same thing, you and I, Connor, will talk a lot about colors and, like you just said, the shapes, the corners, the angles, even typography, fonts, right? Huge difference if you're using Comic Sans versus something that's more contemporary and a little bit more straighter edged. So that's definitely a big impact on how it comes across and how it gets conveyed.
Okay, so when a client comes to us and they have these ideas for how they want to revise a logo design that you did, what happens if we're not really a fan of it?
If we're not loving it,
Yeah.
you want me to take that one then, Connor?
I can just...
Yeah.
I think it's just important to understand what they're really asking for, like see through their direct, like sort of command and their like specific ask, and more see why they're asking that question, why they want these changes.
Yeah.
And you can kind of try to use your own expertise and like creative freedom to sort of achieve what they're looking for, I think, without just directly listening to them, because ultimately, like, we know what we're doing about this, and maybe they're not just as trained as us, so
Right.
there's like a different level of expertise, I think, involved.
I think you're right. I think there's a lack of eloquence in their language to us, and sometimes they go, I want it this way. It's our job to not take offense because we are the experts. I've been doing it for 18 years and you've been doing it for however many years at this point. So collectively, we know what we're doing, right, without being arrogant, but like you said, Connor, it's why are they saying this? What's the problem they're trying to solve? And a lot of times they don't know exactly how to word that. So it's our job to kind of decipher that and be the detectives and figure out, oh, they don't like the hard angles everywhere. Maybe they like more organic shapes or whatever it is. So that's basically how we go about it.
This is a random question just out of my own curiosity.
I'm ready.
How do you navigate like current trends and making sure that something is adaptable and like long term?
What do you think,
know what I
Connor?
mean?
Do you have any thoughts on that?
You see all these logos everywhere and like these modern rebrands and things like that.
Exactly.
And I think it's subconsciously
Exactly.
just sort of, as a designer, I think you just pick up these things.
Yeah.
And like when you're building a new logo, it just sort of happens naturally. Like you
Yeah.
sort of know what people are expecting these days. And I think you can just use that and try to, especially for like doing like rebrands and things like that, like updating. We've done a few where we didn't change the logo too much, but just sort of refreshed it to meet like modern standards.
What sort of things did we change in those examples?
Depending on how far back was like their last rebrand, I mean, there were things like heavy gradients and like sort of 3D
Oh,
effects
yeah.
on like older
Yeah.
logos in like early 2000s.
Web
that-
2.0 time.
Exactly. So like nowadays, a lot of things are leaning towards more like minimalist and like flat
Clean.
colors, very like versatile logos that
And
can
we're
be
moving
used
towards more literal now.
a
as
lot
well.
more. Yeah. I mean, think things like even like Burger King just sort of went through a pretty radical redesign where
Yeah.
they had sort of a very iconic, almost like cartoonishly like
The 90s,
round
they
and-
were
yeah,
cartoons, yeah.
very 90s, and now it's
70s inspired almost.
yeah, it's very 70s
Muted,
inspired. It's
right?
muted, it's very flat, it's simple geometry, and I think that works to meet modern trends, but I think you also do lose a little bit of character and a little bit of originality when you start to lean too heavily into these
Yeah.
trends, and I think that's a problem that is worth noting when you're designing a logo, just to sort of try to avoid this. You want to make sure that your client feels like it can stand out and still be unique, but doesn't feel like a dated or out of place logo across like the market, you know?
Very well said, yeah.
But how do brands know when it's time to evolve in terms of their visual identity?
Yeah, so a lot of times it comes down to things start feeling stale. Their language, as they start discussing things with the people they're training that are coming into the company, doesn't really match up with like the actual culture of the company, and their advertising does the same thing. It's kind of speaking to maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, whatever it is, that sort of cultural expectation as Connor was kind of talking about, right? Things lose their oomph a bit as far as all the marketing, the sales, the advertising, and you'll see it in the numbers. You'll see less sales, you'll see less leads, you'll see less people asking questions about what you do and whatever. Or you'll get the wrong target markets coming to you suddenly. You know, I think Connor is right to say that the shifts of trends kind of happen subconsciously, and I think that's part of culture.
Yeah.
And as designers, it's our jobs to be aware, be in tune, to you know, tap in and to be exposed to what's happening everywhere around us, because culture really is just about patterns of either behavior or of aesthetic, of style, right? And that changes with all different target markets and groups and stuff. So you really got to kind of know who you're working with, who you're working for, and evolve it to match the current day and where you're going, not what it's always been.
Clearly, hopefully, you know, some of this has shown that a lot more goes into the design choices than
Make it pop.
just
Pretty.
making it pop.
Make it
Whatever
pop.
you gotta
Yeah.
do to make it pop.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. I think to kind of show what we mean, you know, with a real example, maybe if we want to turn over to looking at 3 stylescapes that Connor designed for one of our clients. So I do want to mention that this is going to be a bit visual. So
Yeah.
for our audio listeners, you might want to transition over to YouTube to watch this part of the podcast. So basically what we're doing here is looking at 3 different stylescapes that Connor designed for one of our clients, Trinity Advisory. We're going to walk through the 3 different directions. I mean, right off the bat, you see all 3 of them side by side. They're all very different, but they all work for this brand, and that's one thing we really like to highlight when we present stylescapes to a client. The concepts, the directions might be different, but they're all communicating and conveying slightly different things without being inauthentic to the brand itself.
Right.
So we're going to talk a bit about what each of them actually means. So let's start with the first one. What do you see, Rick, when looking at concept number 1?
Yeah, so as I'm looking at this, what I'm getting here is something that is professional, but it's contemporary in the use of its colors and typography, its fonts. Also using the line art and the simple, you know, basic lines here, and look at this font over here. It's very consistent with that, and that's a very contemporary look, which I think makes it seem more credible to today's needs and not so established in the history of things. And I don't even know what he does yet, right? Just that's the feeling I'm getting from looking at this. As I scroll over, we got this font to juxtapose the kind of straight line art looking stuff. So this gives it a little bit more slightly typewritery, human feel, a little bit more organic, you know. And the language here is really powerful, so that works too. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing here.
I think it was meant to sort of like appeal to a more corporate audience,
Yeah.
to feel very professional, like very approachable to like high level, like working like business professionals,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
Executives,
Exactly.
yeah,
Stuff like that.
management. Yep.
All right, so how about we contrast that to the second direction? What was your thought process designing this one?
Well,
I know you didn't.
this was technically created by our content marketing specialist, Emma.
Behind the scenes right
Yeah,
now.
yeah. But I know the idea was to feel a lot more organic, very approachable, very like,
So
I think more person to person based, like building that trusting relationship.
Yep.
when you say organic, can you break that down as a designer? That's something we say is like designer creative types, but I think folks may not always know what that means.
Especially in the case of this stylescape. I think to her that meant a lot of rounded shapes. We use a lot of circles.
Yeah.
That became like a very big motif in this one. And then more like earthy tones. So we picked like this soft green and like these sort of pastel colors because they were much more muted, not harsh, and it kind of fits together very like natural looking. Like think it uses a lot of like colors and shapes more from nature rather than like, you know, the first one relies on imagery with like skyscrapers and like sharp edges and like these modern sort of techie designs. Whereas this one feels a lot more like grounded in reality and more like just focused on like sort of a person to person experience and like building a relationship with the client.
Absolutely. And so from, just to jump in from the strategist perspective, when I was giving these certain direction guidelines to Connor for these first two, looking at the first one, you know, one thing that we really wanted to convey about this brand was the expertise. You know, our client had years of experience and we really wanted to come off as very established and professional. But a big part of the identity of this brand is this very client-centric kind of philosophy. And, you know, our client's a very, you know, warm and approachable
Yeah.
person. And it's all about that human connection rather than, he said to us a million times, like, it's not about
Yeah.
like a quick sale. It's about, you know, the
The
meaningful
relationship, yeah.
conversations.
I mean, ultimately, he's sort of a family man, you know. I think he
Yeah.
wants it to come across. He wants it to
Definitely,
show that
yeah.
he cares about people more than anything. I mean, he even went into this industry because he wanted to get away from like this cold corporate sort of surrounding.
Absolutely.
So I think this fits that perfectly for him.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
And-
we really leaned into that in this direction, which very much contrasted the first one
Yeah.
for sure.
And in design, a lot of what we talk about, especially like brand strategy side of design, it's all about contrasts, right? So if we contrast the first stylescape to this, it's very easy to see how one is a little bit more softer, a little gentler, a little more personable, but also the contrast of the imagery, the photography,
Yeah, I wanna
right?
mention that for
So in this
sure.
first one, for those listening, we have the client is standing in the photo. He's wearing a nice button down. He's nice headshot type of thing, business casual. And the second one, he's sitting. He's kind of got his hands on his knee or his elbows on his knees. He's wearing a kind of a hoodie there. He's looking very casual, but he's looking like confident as well, right? So it's somebody it feels like I can trust. And as you look at the other imagery we have in the second one here, a lot of people working together. There's a lot of happy folks. We don't want to be necessarily total stock photo over here, but that thing they're trying to do in stock photos where you have them smiling and working together, that's what we're showing in the second one. Versus the first one, we do a lot of that line art and the skyscraper buildings and things like that.
Moving on to concept 3 then, the idea here, at least behind kind of the initial direction that we were thinking about, is a bit more confident, bold, overall just being a bit more unique and unconventional for the industry.
This one really pops.
You
Yeah.
could say that. This one stands out because I feel like it portrays him in a more like confident sort of setting. I think he looks trustworthy and confident in the other two as well. But this one, he's obviously looking towards the future. He has this harsh contrast in his photography. The colors are very like, it's very like reliant on a lot of negative space, a lot of white, simple colors, but like a good contrast with like the bright blues and the like dark black versus the bright white as well. The font choices I feel like are very sort of, I don't want to say like edgy, but the whole thing is going for a much edgier vibe than the other two
Like a
were.
tech edgy vibe, you know.
for sure.
like-
With
yeah.
There's a lot of focus more so on the powerful messaging and just a lot more minimalistic overall. You'll see her with the imagery, like there's not really a focus on, you know, those client relationships or a big focus on imagery in general. It's a lot more on just like kind of that negative space and the background patterns and those shapes like you spoke about.
a lot of heavy contrast in the colors and the
Yeah.
photos,
Yeah.
and I think that definitely stands this one out from the other two.
Really makes it pop.
Really makes it pop.
Rick, we're over you.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so then looking at all three all together, again, like I said at the beginning, they're three very different directions. They convey very different things, but they all work for this brand in different
Yeah.
ways.
Ultimately, you said he was looking to sort of portray himself as being very trustworthy.
Yeah.
And so when designing these, we wanted to go into it making sure that was like very clear, but we wanted to make sure that each one sort of showed this in a different way.
Yeah. We're
And so-
communicating trust in three different
Exactly.
ways. The first one being more so about conveying trust through the trustworthy expertise, the years of experience that, you know, the company is bringing to the table. Compared to the second one, the trust is more so in the individual, the client advisor relationship, that human connection, that more personal connection. I can trust you, you know, to guide me into making informed decisions. And the third one is all about trust through that confidence, like you mentioned before. So same sort of key idea that we really wanted to convey of that key element of the brand's essence, this element of trustworthiness, translated into three very different design approaches. So hopefully by taking a look at these three different stylescape directions, it's a bit easier to understand what we mean by putting intention into certain design choices, by having that upfront strategy established, going through that in-depth brand discovery phase. We're able to dissect those key elements of the brand that we want to convey through design choices. So, you know, hopefully this shows exactly how we go about doing that.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a review. Also, make sure to share this with any friends and colleagues that you think might be helpful as well.
And if there are any other topics you want us to talk about or questions you have, definitely let us know by sending us a message on social media, and follow us too.
And definitely make sure you hit the website, creative.com. Tons of resources out there. Until next time, have a good one.